The knock of desperation, the door opened, and William Ashford saw something he hadn't seen in 3 years. People. A woman stood on his porch, barely standing really, her body swaying like a tree in the wind. Behind her, three little girls huddled together in the cold. Their faces were hollow. Their lips were blue. The smallest one, a baby in her mother's arms, wasn't even crying. That silence terrified him more than any scream ever could. The woman's eyes met his, and in them he saw the same desperation he'd felt once. The same look he'd worn the night he screamed for help, and nobody came. Her voice came out in a whisper, cracked and dry. "Please, just shelter. Just for one night. We'll be gone by morning." But William knew something she didn't. The town had sent her here. They'd whispered her name, pointed her toward his mountain, knowing exactly what they were doing. They sent her knowing one of two things would happen. Either he'd turn her away and winter would finish what they'd started, or something far more dangerous would begin. Neither of them knew. They just sealed both their fates. This was Ash Hollow in 1874, a town that looked peaceful on the outside, but rotted from within. William had lived on this mountain alone for 3 years. 3 years without speaking a single word. 3 years since his wife, Sarah, died. 3 years since he buried his infant son Thomas with his own hands. The town knew his story. They knew his silence, and they used it. 3 weeks earlier, Mira Boone had been a different woman. She'd had a husband, a small cabin in town, and hope. Then her husband collapsed in the field one afternoon and never got back up. The doctor said it was his heart. The town said it was God's will. But Mira knew the truth. It was poverty that killed him. Working himself to death, trying to feed 4 mouths on land that barely grew weeds. The day after the funeral, everything changed. Suddenly, the neighbors who'd smiled at her in church wouldn't meet her eyes. The shopkeeper who'd given her credit before now wanted cash she didn't have. Women who'd called her friend whispered behind their hands when she passed. Her husband had barely been in the ground a week when she realized the truth. She'd always been a burden to them. They just tolerated her because of him. Mira knocked on every door in Ash Hollow, begging for work. Anything. She could clean, cook, sew scrub floors. She'd do it all for just enough to feed her daughters. Ava was 7, smart as a whip and twice as sharp. June was 5, with a voice like honey when she sang. And baby Rose was only 2, still learning to walk. They needed her. They needed food. But every door closed in her face. Martha Bell, the richest woman in town, stood in her doorway and looked Mira up and down like she was dirt. "We don't help those who won't help themselves," Martha said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Then she shut the door so hard the frame shook. Sheriff Tulver found her sitting in the town square one evening, staring at nothing. He cleared his throat and shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Mira, you're becoming a problem," he said quietly. "People are talking, saying you're hysterical, saying you can't care for those girls properly." His eyes wouldn't meet hers. She knew what that meant. They were coming for her children. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Mira woke to find Ava and June outside in the snow, scooping it into their mouths. They were eating snow to fill their stomachs because there was no food left. None. She'd sold everything. The furniture, their clothes, even her wedding ring, the only thing she had left of her husband. It still wasn't enough. That night, the town council met. Mira wasn't invited, but she heard about it the next morning when they came for her. They said she was hysterical, unfit, a danger to herself and her children. Sheriff Tulver looked ashamed as he wrapped the chains around her wrists and locked her inside her own cabin. "It's for your own protection," he muttered, but his hand shook as he turned the key. They left her daughters outside. 3 little girls, alone, with no food and no heat and no hope. Ava, brave little Ava, held her sisters close and tried not to cry. She had to be strong. Mama needed her to be strong. But one person in Ash Hollow still had a shred of humanity left. Mrs. Brennan, an old widow who lived 2 doors down, waited until dark. Then she crept to the cabin with a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. She pushed it through the window to Ava and whispered urgently, "There's a man on the mountain, 3 years alone up there. Hasn't spoken since his wife died. People say he's crazy, but I knew him before. He was kind once." She gripped Ava's hand through the bars. "He's your only chance, child. Get your mama free and go to him. It's either that or you all freeze." Ava didn't sleep that night. She waited until her mother's breathing slowed, until Rose and June were curled up together for warmth. Then she pulled the hairpin from her braid and worked it into the lock. Her fingers were cold and clumsy, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. After an hour, the lock clicked. The chains fell away. Mira could barely walk. Days without food had left her weak, her legs trembling with every step. But she had to move, had to get her babies to safety. Ava held Rose, even though the toddler was almost too heavy for her. June walked between them, silent and scared. Baby Rose didn't cry. She was too weak even for that. That terrified Mira more than anything else. They climbed the mountain in the dark, snow biting at their faces, wind howling through the trees. Every step was agony. Mira's lungs burned, her vision blurred, but she kept moving because stopping meant dying, and she wouldn't let her daughters die. Not like this. Not because a town decided they weren't worth saving. At the top of the mountain, through the trees, she saw it. A cabin, a single light glowing in the window. Warm, alive, everything they weren't. This was it, their last chance. If the man inside turned them away, winter would take them. If he let them in, she didn't know what would happen. What would he want in return? What would he demand? But she was out of choices. Mira's hand shook as she raised it to the door. Her daughters huddled behind her, silent and scared. She knocked 3 times, the sound echoing into the darkness like a judgment. For a moment, nothing, just wind and cold and fear. Then the door opened, and when that door opened, everything changed. The silent sanctuary William Ashford stared at the woman collapsing on his porch like his mind couldn't process what he was seeing. People, real people. After 3 years of nothing but silence and ghosts, there were actual human beings standing at his door. The woman's eyes rolled back as her knees buckled. The oldest girl lunged forward, trying to catch her mother, but not strong enough. The baby in the woman's arms slipped, and William moved without thinking. He caught the child before she hit the ground. The baby's lips were blue. Her tiny fingers were ice cold. She should have been screaming, crying something, but she was silent. That silence cut through him like a knife because he knew what it meant. He'd held his own son like this once, felt that same terrible quiet. This baby was giving up. She was too weak to fight anymore. William looked at the 3 girls, then at their mother crumpled on his porch. Every instinct screamed at him to close the door, to go back to his isolation, his safe, predictable pain. 3 years he'd spent building walls around himself, and now these strangers were asking him to tear them down. But that baby's silence wouldn't let him. He couldn't. Not again. Without a word, he stepped aside. The oldest girl helped her mother up, half dragging her through the doorway. The middle girl followed, clutching her sister's coat. William carried the baby inside and kicked the door shut against the cold. The woman's voice was barely a whisper as she collapsed into the chair he offered. "Just one night. Just shelter. We'll be gone by dawn. I promise." Her eyes begged him to believe her, to not ask for more than she could give. William didn't answer. He never answered. Instead, he moved to the stove and ladled hot broth into bowls. He sliced bread, thick pieces, and set out dried meat from his stores. The children stared at the food like they'd seen a miracle. The oldest one, maybe 7 or 8, watched him with sharp, suspicious eyes. Smart kid. She was trying to figure out what he'd want in return. He pushed the bowls toward them and gestured for them to eat. The middle girl grabbed her bowl immediately, drinking the broth so fast she choked. The oldest one ate slower, never taking her eyes off him, protecting her family even while starving. William respected that. The baby wouldn't eat at first. She just lay in her mother's arms, listless and gray. William found honey in his cupboard and dabbed a tiny bit on her lips. After a moment, her tongue moved. Then again, she began to suck the honey off his finger, weak but trying. The woman started crying, quiet tears streaming down her face. William prepared his own bed for them, the only real bed in the cabin. He pulled out extra blankets, ones that still smelled faintly of lavender from years ago. Sarah's blankets. He hadn't touched them since she died. His hands shook as he spread them over the mattress. Then he grabbed his own bedroll and laid it by the fire. The floor would be fine. He'd slept in worse places. The oldest girl, Ava, he heard her mother call her, helped her sisters into the bed. The middle one, June, started humming softly some little song as she settled the baby between them. It was the first sound of life William had heard in his cabin in 3 years. It hurt, but also felt like something waking up inside him, something he'd thought was dead. The woman, Mira, could barely keep her eyes open, but she looked at him from across the room and asked again, "Why are you helping us?" William said nothing. He couldn't speak even if he wanted to. The words had left him 3 years ago and never came back. But his eyes said what his voice couldn't. Because no one helped me. Because I know what it's like to beg and have every door slammed shut. Because I won't be them. As Mira's eyes drifted closed, she noticed something hanging on a peg by the door. A woman's shawl, faded and worn, with dark stains that looked like old blood. In the corner, on a shelf, were children's toys carved from wood. A horse, a top, a small train. They were covered in dust, untouched for years. She wanted to ask, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could form words. While they slept, William sat by the fire and tried to process what he'd just done. He let strangers into his sanctuary, into the place where he'd buried himself alive. Part of him wanted to wake them at dawn and send them away. But another part, a part he thought had died with Sarah and Thomas, whispered that maybe this was why he'd survived. Maybe this was the reason. Morning came cold and gray. In town, a neighbor woman making her rounds found the Boone cabin empty. The chains lay on the floor, broken. The doors swung open in the wind. She ran to Martha Bell's house, breathless and scandalized. Martha's eyes lit up like she'd just won a prize. She gathered her shawl and marched to the town square, her voice carrying across the morning air. She's gone to him, the mountain hermit. Mira Boone has taken her daughters to that man's cabin. Sheriff Tulver looked uncomfortable. Should we bring her back? She broke the restraining order. But Reverend Crow, standing beside Martha, shook his head slowly. Let God's will be done. If she's chosen that path, let her walk it. Martha's smile was cruel and satisfied. Or let her destroy herself. A widow in a bachelor's cabin. The scandal alone will finish her. She looked around at the gathered crowd, making sure they all understood. Either the cold kills her, or the shame does. Either way, our problem solves itself. The town council nodded in agreement. They'd wait. Let the rumors spread. Let decent people whisper about what a desperate widow might do to secure shelter. Let the weight of judgment crush her. They didn't need to lift a finger. Society would do their work for them. Back on the mountain, days began to pass in a strange new rhythm. William kept his routine. He woke before dawn, did his chores, hunted in the woods, cooked simple meals. But now there were others in his space. Others who needed him. He didn't speak. He communicated with gestures, nods, and sometimes wrote short messages on a slate he kept by the fire. More wood. Stay inside today. Meat cooking. Simple things. Necessary things. Ava started following him around, watching everything he did. When he chopped wood, she picked up the smaller pieces and stacked them. When he checked his traps, she walked behind him, learning the trails. She didn't talk much either. They understood each other in that way. June was different. She sang while she worked, helping her mother tidy the cabin, making up little songs about the trees and the snow and the warm fire. One day, she braided together some dried grass she found and presented it to William like a crown. He stared at it, not knowing what to do. She placed it on his head and giggled. Something cracked inside his chest. His mouth moved. Not words, but almost. A smile. The first one in 3 years. Baby Rose started eating more, her cheeks slowly getting color back. She began crawling around the cabin, exploring everything. One morning, she pulled herself up on William's leg while he was cooking and looked at him with big, curious eyes. He froze. She smiled at him, showing tiny teeth. His hand trembled as he touched her soft hair. Mira grew stronger each day. The food, the warmth, the safety, they were bringing her back to life. She tried to help with chores, but she was still weak. One afternoon, she stumbled while carrying water from the barrel outside. William caught her before she fell, his hands on her arms, steadying her. Their eyes locked. For a moment, neither moved. Her heart hammered in her chest. His breath caught. Then they both pulled away quickly, awkward and flustered. William turned back to his work. Mira pressed her hand to her racing heart. What was happening? That evening, while William was outside checking the animals, Mira explored the cabin. She wasn't snooping, just trying to understand the man who'd saved them. On a shelf, tucked behind some books, she found it. A photograph in a simple frame. A woman holding a baby. Both of them smiling, frozen in a moment of pure joy. The woman was beautiful, with kind eyes and dark hair. The baby couldn't have been more than a few months old. Mira turned the photograph over. Written on the back in careful handwriting, 1871. My beloved Sarah and our son Thomas. Her breath caught. Sarah, Thomas, his wife, his son. She did the math. 3 years ago, the same time he stopped speaking. She heard footsteps behind her and froze. William stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders. His eyes went to the photograph in her hands. For a moment, his face was stone. Then something broke. Raw grief flooded his features, the kind that never really heals. He walked over slowly and took the photograph from her hands, gentle like it might shatter. He looked at it for a long moment, then at baby Rose sleeping in the bed. His face showed everything. The profound grief of loss mixed with something else. Something that looked almost like hope. Like maybe, just maybe, God was giving him a second chance. Mira's voice came out in a whisper. She realized then, they weren't the first family he'd lost. The thawing silence that night, Mira couldn't sleep. She lay in the bed with her daughters curled around her, listening to William move quietly by the fire. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. She slipped out carefully, making sure not to wake the girls, and walked over to where he sat staring into the flames. I'm sorry, she said softly, sitting down across from him. About your wife. About your son. William didn't respond. His jaw tightened, and he kept his eyes on the fire. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. Mira continued anyway. Her voice was gentle but firm. Is that why you stopped speaking? Because words couldn't save them. His hands clenched into fists on his knees. She could see the tension running through his whole body like a rope pulled too tight. She leaned forward, her own voice breaking. I understand. I screamed when they chained me. I begged every person in that town for help. I got on my knees and pleaded, and no one came. Not one person. The words came out of my mouth, but they meant nothing. They changed nothing. William's eyes finally moved from the fire to her face. Really looked at her for the first time. He saw his own pain reflected back at him. The same helplessness. The same betrayal by a world that was supposed to care. Slowly, like it hurt him to do it, he reached for his slate. His hand shook as he wrote, the chalk scraping across the board. He held it up for her to read. Words failed me. I screamed for help. No one answered. He died in my arms. Tears fell down Mira's cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry the world was cruel to you. I'm sorry you had to hold him and watch him slip away. I'm sorry no one came. William stared at the words he'd written, then at her. His hand trembled as he slowly reached across the space between them and touched her shoulder. Just briefly, just a moment of contact. But it was the first time he'd intentionally touched another human being in 3 years. The first time he'd offered comfort instead of just practical help. Mira covered his hand with hers before he could pull away. They sat like that for a moment, two broken people holding on to each other in the darkness. Then William withdrew his hand and nodded toward the bed. She should sleep. She needed rest. But something had shifted between them. A wall had cracked. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to the cabin. William started teaching Ava to track animals in the snow. He showed her how to read the signs, where deer bedded down, how to tell fresh tracks from old ones. She absorbed everything like a sponge, her sharp mind cataloging every detail. She reminded him of himself at that age. Smart, observant, hungry to learn. June continued to bring lightness to everything she touched. One afternoon, she found wildflowers somehow still blooming under the snow near a warm spring. She picked them carefully and braided them into William's hair while he sat working on repairing a trap. He let her do it, sitting perfectly still while her small fingers worked. Ava watched with wide eyes. Mama covered her mouth to hide her smile. Baby Rose took her first real steps one morning. She'd been pulling herself up on furniture for days, getting braver. Then suddenly, she let go. She stood on her own, wobbling, and took one step toward William. Then another. Then she fell forward, and he caught her, lifting her high in the air. She giggled to sound like bells, and something in his chest broke open. He'd lifted Thomas like this once. He'd heard that same giggle. But instead of drowning in grief, he felt something else. Gratitude, that he got to hear it again. Mira watched these moments from across the cabin, her heart expanding in ways she didn't expect. She watched William with her daughters and saw something the town never had. Gentleness, patience, goodness. He was nothing like they'd said. He wasn't crazy or dangerous. He was just hurt, and her daughters were healing him piece by piece. One evening, Mira was finally strong enough to cook a full meal. She made stew from the venison William had brought back, using vegetables from his stores and her mother's recipe she remembered by heart. When she served it to him, he tasted it carefully. Then he nodded, a small nod but definite. Approval. She smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. My mother's recipe. She used to make it every Sunday. William reached for his slate and wrote, "It's good. Thank you." Such simple words, but they meant everything. Mira felt tears prick her eyes again. When was the last time someone had thanked her? When was the last time she'd felt useful, valued, seen? That night, as they settled the children for bed, Ava asked the question Mira had been dreading. "Mama, can we stay here forever?" The cabin went quiet. June looked up hopefully. Even baby Rose seemed to be waiting for the answer. Mira's smile faded. She knelt down and touched Ava's face. "Sweet girl, this isn't our home. This is Mr. Ashford's home. We're guests here. But he likes us," June said. "I know he does. I'm sure he does, honey. But we can't stay forever. When the weather clears, we'll need to figure out what comes next." William heard every word from across the room. His hands stilled on the leather he was working. He stared at the piece in his lap, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. That night, after everyone was asleep, he went to his workshop area and pulled out fresh lumber. The next morning, Mira woke to the sound of sawing. She found William outside, even though it was barely dawn, working on something. As the day went on, she watched him measure and cut and sand. He was building something, a bed frame, a second bed. She watched him work throughout the day, confused and afraid to hope. By evening, the frame was taking shape. She finally approached him, her voice careful. "William, what are you doing?" He didn't stop working, didn't look at her. "You're making a bed," she continued. "Why are you making a bed?" He paused, set down his tools, and finally looked at her. He nodded once. "Yes." Her breath caught. "You're making room for us? You want us to stay?" Another nod. Slower this time. More deliberate. "William, we can't." The words hurt coming out. "The town will destroy your reputation. They already think the worst. If we stay, if people think we're living here as a family without being married, they'll come after you. They'll ruin you." He picked up his slate and wrote, his letters hard and firm. Don't care about town. But I do, Mira said, her voice breaking. I won't ruin you. You've been nothing but good to us. I won't repay that by destroying your name. William's eyes flashed with something. Frustration, maybe, or determination. He erased the slate and wrote again, this time taking his time, making sure every word was clear. You didn't ruin me. You woke me up. The words hung between them like a confession. Mira felt her heart hammering in her chest. The air felt charged, electric. She didn't know what to say, how to respond to that, to the raw honesty of it. The moment stretched, suspended, full of possibility and fear and something neither of them wanted to name yet. Then came a sound that shattered everything. A loud, aggressive bang on the door. The kind of knock that meant authority. That meant trouble. The children froze where they were playing. Ava immediately moved in front of her sisters, protective. June grabbed Rose and held her tight. Mira's face went white. William moved to the door, his body language changing. He stood taller, broader, putting himself between his home and whatever threat was outside. When he opened the door, Sheriff Tulver stood there looking uncomfortable. Behind him were 3 members of the town council. And behind them, smiling with cold satisfaction, was Martha Bell. Sheriff Tulver cleared his throat. William Ashford, Mira Boone. His voice was formal, apologetic, but firm. You're summoned before the town council. Tomorrow at noon. It's about the children, about their living situation. Martha's smile widened. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Her eyes said it all. We're taking them from you. The sheriff shifted his weight. I'm sorry, but it's official. The council needs to determine if this is an appropriate environment for minor children. You're both required to attend. William's hand gripped the door frame so hard his knuckles went white. Mira felt the world tilting under her feet. This was it. This was what she'd feared. They'd come to tear her family apart. As the council members turned to leave, Martha looked back over her shoulder one last time. Her voice was sweet as poison. See you tomorrow, Mira. I'm sure you'll have plenty to explain. William closed the door and turned to see Mira's face. She looked like she might collapse. Ava was crying silently. June held Rose tighter. The baby, sensing the tension, started to whimper. They'd come to tear the family apart, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The trial of shame, the morning, came too fast. Mira barely slept, pacing the cabin floor until William finally touched her shoulder and guided her to sit down. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. They'll take my daughters, she whispered, her voice hollow. They'll split them up, give them to different families. I'll never see them again. Ava heard her mother's words and ran over, wrapping her arms around Mira's waist. We won't go, Mama. We won't. They can't make us. June started crying, clutching her little carved flute William had made for her. Even baby Rose seemed to sense something was wrong, whimpering and reaching for her mother. William watched this, his jaw set hard. He went to the corner and started packing provisions into a bag. Food, water, warm clothes. His movements were deliberate, determined. Mira watched him, confused. What are you doing? She asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up his slate and wrote in large, firm letters. I won't let them. Mira's eyes filled with tears. You can't fight the whole town, William. They have a law on their side. They have power. We have nothing. William looked at her, really looked at her, and wrote again, Watch me. They walked down the mountain together as the sun climbed higher. William led the way, Mira and the girls following close behind. When they reached the edge of town, people stopped what they were doing to stare. Whispers followed them like a cloud. Women pulled their children closer. Men shook their heads. The judgment was thick enough to choke on. Ava held her head high, imitating William's straight-backed walk. June stayed close to her mother, holding her hand tight. William carried baby Rose on his shoulders, and the little girl played with his hair, oblivious to the stares and whispers around them. The town hall was packed when they arrived. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls. The whole town had come to watch. This wasn't just about Mira and her children anymore. This was entertainment, a scandal unfolding in real time. Martha Bell sat in the front row, her arms crossed, her face smug with satisfaction. Next to her sat other prominent town women, all wearing the same expression of righteous judgment. Sheriff Tulver stood near the door, looking like he wished he was anywhere else. And at the front, behind a long table, sat the town council with Reverend Crow in the center. Reverend Crow stood as they entered, his voice booming across the silent hall. We gather today to address a moral crisis in our community, a situation that threatens the very fabric of our Christian values. People murmured in agreement. Mira felt her legs shaking, but William's presence beside her kept her standing. The sheriff stepped forward and read from a paper, his voice flat and official. Mira Boone, having been deemed mentally unfit by this council, did break a lawful restraining order and has taken residence with an unmarried man, thereby exposing 3 minor children to impropriety and potential moral corruption. Gasps rippled through the crowd. More murmurs. Mira wanted to disappear into the floor. Martha Bell stood up, her voice carrying clear and sharp. I saw them with my own eyes, living as man and wife without the blessing of holy matrimony. It's sinful. It's disgraceful. Those poor children are being exposed to immorality every single day. Another townsperson stood. The children should be placed in proper Christian homes, homes with married couples who can provide proper guidance. Separate homes, someone else added. 3 different families could take 1 each. Give them all proper chances. Mira's heart stopped. They were planning to split her daughters up, to scatter them across the town like they were nothing, like their bond meant nothing. She tried to speak, her voice shaking. He saved our lives. We were dying, starving. He gave us food and warmth and shelter when every single one of you turned us away. Reverend Crow cut her off, his voice hard. Salvation doesn't excuse sin, Mrs. Boone. Good intentions don't override God's law or man's law. Ava couldn't stay quiet anymore. She stepped forward, her young voice ringing out clear and fierce. He's good. He's better than all of you. He fed us when you let us starve. He's kind and gentle, and he's never hurt us. You're the ones who are bad. Sheriff Tulver moved forward. Child, that's enough. Hush now. But Ava didn't hush. You chained my mama. You left us alone in the cold. And now you want to take us away from the only person who actually helped us? That's not Christian. That's cruel. The hall erupted in angry voices. Someone control that child. This is exactly why they need proper homes. The girl has no discipline. Mira was crying now, pulling Ava back, trying to protect her from their anger. June was sobbing. Baby Rose started wailing. Everything was falling apart. They were losing. The town was going to win. And then William stood up. The room went completely silent. Ever I turned to him. Everyone in Ash Hollow knew William Ashford's story. Everyone knew he hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years. Not since the night his wife and son died. His silence was legendary, almost mythical. His voice came out rough and unused, like rusty metal scraping against stone. But it was powerful. It filled the hall like thunder. Enough! Martha Bell gasped audibly. Reverend Crow actually stumbled back a step. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. William's eyes swept across the crowd, landing on each face, making them see him, making them listen. She knocked on my door. Starving. Desperate. 3 children dying in the cold. His voice grew stronger with each word, more sure. Where were you? Any of you? Silence. Heavy, guilty silence. I gave him food, shelter, warmth, safety. That's all. Martha found her voice, sharp and accusing. You gave him scandal. You gave him a life of sin. William's eyes flashed as he turned to her. I gave them life when you'd given them chains. The words hit like a slap. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They remembered. They all remember the chains. Reverend Crow tried to regain control. "Mr. Ashford, we understand your compassion, but this doesn't excuse the impropriety of the situation." The appearance of William interrupted him, his voice cutting clean through. "I'm not done." The Reverend's mouth closed. William turned to look at Mira, and something in his face softened. His voice became quieter, but no less powerful. "I was dead for 3 years, walking, breathing, but dead inside." Mira's breath caught. She could see where this was going, and her heart started racing. "They brought me back." He looked at Ava, at June, at baby Rose in Mira's arms. "She brought me back." He turned back to face the council, and his voice rang out clear and strong. "You want to judge? Judge this." He reached out and took Mira's hand, right there in front of everyone. The gasps and whispers exploded through the crowd. Mira's eyes went wide. Her hand trembled in his. William's voice carried over all the noise. "I'm asking her to marry me. Right here, right now. Make those children mine legally. Make her my wife." The town hall erupted into chaos. People shouting, arguing, half standing from their seats. Martha Bell's face went bright red. This is a farce, a mockery of the institution of marriage. But Sheriff Tulver stood up, and his voice was calm and thoughtful. "Actually, Martha, that would solve the legal issue entirely." Reverend Crow looked torn, his face conflicted. "A marriage of convenience? Done simply to avoid scandal? That's hardly." William turned to face him, and his voice cut through everything else. It was raw with truth, with something he'd been holding back. Nothing convenient about loving her. The room fell silent again. Complete, total silence. Everyone staring. Mira felt tears streaming down her face. Different tears now. Not fear or despair. Something else entirely. Her voice came out in a whisper. "You love me." William looked down at her, and his eyes answered before his words did. They were soft and warm and completely honest. "Yes." Her hand tightened around his. Her heart felt too big for her chest. This man who'd been silent for 3 years was speaking, was declaring his feelings in front of the entire town, was risking everything for her, for them. The town held its breath, every eye on Mira, waiting for her answer. Martha Bell looked furious. The council looked shocked. Sheriff Tulver looked almost hopeful. And William looked terrified, his hand holding hers like she was the only solid thing in the world. The town fell silent, waiting for her answer. Mira looked at William, really looked at him. This man who'd opened his door when he had every reason to keep it closed, who'd fed her children when they were starving, who'd protected them, taught them, held them when they cried, who'd been silent for 3 years and found his voice to defend her. She looked at her daughters, Ava watching with hope in her eyes, June holding baby Rose, both of them waiting. Her family, the one she'd fought so hard to keep together. Then she looked at William again, and her voice came out steady and clear, strong in a way it hadn't been in months. "You gave us shelter when the world locked us out." She squeezed his hand tighter. "You fed us when we were starving. You protected us when we were hunted. You saw us when everyone else looked away." William's eyes never left her face. "Yes," Mira said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ava let out a shout of joy. June started crying happy tears. Baby Rose clapped her hands, not understanding, but catching the joy anyway. They rushed forward, wrapping their arms around both William and Mira, a tangle of hugs and relief and happiness. The town hall sat in stunned silence. Then slowly, very slowly, Sheriff Tulver started clapping. It was quiet at first, just his hands. Then Mrs. Brennan, the old widow who'd helped them escape, stood up and joined him. A few other people, the ones with hearts still soft enough to recognize love when they saw it, added their applause. Martha Bell looked like she'd swallow glass. She stood up, her face twisted with fury, and stormed toward the door. Several of her closest friends followed her, their skirts swishing with indignation. Reverend Crow stood there looking humbled, perhaps for the first time in years. He cleared his throat. Very well then. I will perform this ceremony, but it must be done properly. 1 week's time, to allow for proper preparations and ensure this is a genuine commitment, not simply a legal maneuver. Sheriff Tulver nodded his approval. The children stay with their mother until the wedding. After that, they're legally Mr. Ashford's family. Case dismissed. They walked out of that town hall together, and for the first time since her husband died, Mira felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, solid hope. Not just for survival, but for a future. For happiness. The walk back up the mountain felt different. Lighter somehow, despite everything. Ava skipped ahead, her earlier tears replaced with excitement. June sang a made-up song about weddings and families. William carried Rose on his shoulders again, and this time when people stared, he stared back. No shame, no apology, just a man protecting his family. But that night, as they settled into the cabin, an orange glow lit up the valley below. Mira stepped onto the porch and felt her blood run cold. Fire, big and bright and unmistakable, and she knew exactly which building was burning. Her old cabin, the one where her husband had died, where she'd been chained, where her nightmare had begun. It was fully engulfed in flames, lighting up the night sky like a warning, like a message. William came to stand beside her, following her gaze. The children were asleep inside, safe and warm, but they both knew what this meant. They burned it, Mira whispered, her voice trembling. They're erasing me, erasing any proof that I ever had a life before you, before this. William's arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm. Let them. You're not that cabin. You're not that life anymore. You're here. She turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. What if they come for us next? What if they decide to burn this cabin too? What if? He turned her to face him fully, his hands gentle on her shoulders. They won't. We're legal now. Protected by law once we're married. They can whisper all they want, but they can't touch us. But the hate. Her voice broke. I saw it in their eyes. In Martha's face. That kind of hate doesn't just disappear. William's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb wiping away her tears. I've lived 3 years alone on this mountain, Mira. I know hate. I've felt it. Been drowning in it. But I know this too. He paused, making sure she was really hearing him. This is stronger. And then he kissed her. Soft and careful and full of promise. Their first real kiss. Not for show, not for the town, just for them. Mira melted into it, her hands clutching his shirt, anchoring herself to this moment. This man, this impossible, beautiful second chance. When they pulled apart, she was crying again, but different tears now. Relief, joy, hope. I never thought I'd feel safe again, she whispered against his chest. William's arms tightened around her. You are, always. I promise you that. They stood there on the porch watching the distant flames until they finally died down, watching her past burn away. And when they went back inside, Mira felt like she was walking into her future instead of running from her past. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Mira found fabric in town, bought with the last of William's trading money, and sewed a simple dress. Nothing fancy, but clean and new and hers. Mrs. Brennan visited with wildflowers she'd somehow coaxed into early bloom in her greenhouse. For your bouquet, dear, she said with tears in her eyes. I'm so proud of you both. Ava practiced her role as flower girl until she could walk the length of the cabin with perfect posture, scattering imaginary petals. June taught Rose to clap on command. For when they kiss, she announced proudly. William spent his evenings carving. Mira thought he was working on something practical, maybe a new shelf or tool. But one night, he showed her what he'd been making. 2 rings, carved from mountain oak. Simple and strong and perfect. He handed her one, and she saw he'd carved tiny flowers into the band. Her breath caught. William, they're beautiful. He picked up his slate, even though he was speaking more now, and wrote out his vows. He wanted her to see them first, to approve them. She read the words through tears. I vow to shelter you, feed you, protect you, love you, always. She picked up the chalk with shaking hands and wrote her response beneath his words. I vow to trust you, stand with you, choose you, every day. William read it, then spoke the last line aloud, his voice getting stronger every day. Every day. Mira smiled through her tears. You're talking more. You give me reason to, he said simply. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sunrise that painted the mountains gold and pink. They chose to hold the ceremony on the mountain ridge, where the world felt bigger and the town felt farther away, where it was just them and the sky and the future stretching out before them. Only a handful of people came. Sheriff Tulver, who'd shown them respect in the end, Mrs. Brennan, and a few other kind neighbors who'd never participated in the town's cruelty. It was small and simple and perfect. Reverend Crow looked genuinely moved as he began. We gather here, in God's creation, to bind two souls who found each other in the darkness. Ava, June, and Rose stood beside their mother, dressed in their best clothes, holding wildflowers. Ava stood tall and proud. June couldn't stop smiling. Rose kept trying to eat the flowers, making everyone quietly laugh. When it came time for vows, William spoke clearly. His voice didn't shake. I vow to shelter you, feed you, protect you, love you, always. Mira's voice was just as strong. I vow to trust you, stand with you, choose you. Every day, they exchanged the oak rings, sliding them onto each other's fingers. Simple wood, but they felt heavier than gold, more meaningful than diamonds. Reverend Crow smiled, something genuine in it this time. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. William, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was witnessed by mountains and blessed by sunrise. It was tender and full of promise and real. The children cheered. Mrs. Brennan dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief. Even Sheriff Tulver smiled. For the first time in what felt like forever, they weren't running. They weren't hiding. They weren't surviving. They were husband and wife. They were a family, legal and real in theirs. As they walked back down toward the cabin, hand in hand with the girls dancing around them, Mira noticed something. Down in the valley, people had stopped their morning work to watch. The whole town could see them up there on the ridge, could see the ceremony, could see them married. The town is watching, Mira said quietly. William squeezed her hand. Let them watch. Let them see we survived them. She smiled, leaning into his shoulder as they walked. For the first time since her first husband died, she felt complete. Not because William had saved her, but because they'd saved each other. But neither of them knew the hardest test was still to come. Summer arrived and transformed everything. The cabin that had been William's tomb for 3 years became alive with laughter and light. He built an additional room for the girls, giving them their own space. Ava learned to hunt small game and became his constant shadow in the woods. June planted a vegetable garden and sang while she worked, her voice carrying through the trees. Baby Rose toddled everywhere now, calling William Papa. It was her first word, and when she said it, his eyes filled with tears. Mira taught the girls to read by lamplight every evening. William would sit nearby, whittling or mending tools, but always listening. Sometimes he'd speak up. Read that part again. His voice was coming back more each day, stronger and more sure. There were quiet moments, too. Moments when William and Mira worked side by side in the garden, their hands brushing as they planted seeds. Evenings on the porch watching sunsets, his hand on her back. Whispered conversations after the children fell asleep, sharing dreams and fears and hopes. They were growing from a survival partnership into something deeper. Real love built day by day, but the town hadn't forgotten them. One day they went down for supplies, and people stared. Martha Bell stood in the mercantile and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Some women will do anything to trap a man. Anything at all. William's jaw tightened. Mira squeezed his hand, whispering, "Let it go. She's not worth it." But Ava had heard. She marched right up to Martha, her young face fierce. "He chose us. You're just jealous because no one would ever choose you." Martha's face went red. "How dare you speak to me that way?" William stepped forward, placing himself between Martha and his daughter. His voice was calm but firm. "The child's right." He turned to face everyone in the store. "My wife and daughters. Anyone has a problem with that, speak to me directly." The silence was thick. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. They bought their supplies and left with their heads high. Outside, Mira let out a shaky breath. "That was terrifying." "You were brave," William said. She laughed nervously. "I was shaking the whole time." "So was I. But we did it together." He took her hand as they walked. "We're stronger together than their hate." Fall came with its first harvest from June's garden. Winter returned, but this time there was no fear. The cabin was warm, the pantry was full, and the family was safe. Christmas morning, William gave each girl a gift he'd carved. Ava received her own small hunting knife with her name etched in the handle. June got a wooden flute that actually played music. Rose received a wooden horse on wheels that she could pull behind her. For Mira, he'd built a rocking chair. "For the porch," he explained. "For watching our family grow." She cried happy tears and threw her arms around him. "I love you so much." William held her close, surrounded by their daughter's laughter. "I love you all. You saved me." Ava looked up from examining her knife. "We saved each other, Papa." Spring came again, bringing them full circle. One evening, the whole family sat on the porch. Rose played with her toys. Ava read aloud from a book. June practiced her flute. William and Mira rocked in their chairs, hands intertwined, watching their daughters in the golden evening light. Mira reflected quietly. "A year ago, I knocked on your door begging for shelter." William squeezed her hand, "And I opened it looking for a reason to live. Did you find it?" He looked at Ava helping Rose with her toy, at June's concentration as she played, then at Mira. "Every day. I find it every day." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling completely at peace. "They said I was starving when I came here. And I was. But not just for food." "For what?" he asked softly. "For this. For home. For love that doesn't break under pressure. For family that chooses to stay." She turned to look at him. "For you." He kissed her forehead gently. "Never breaking. I promise you that. Always." The sun set over their mountain, painting everything gold. Inside the cabin doorframe, William had carved something permanent. Mira, Ava, June, Rose, 1874. The day we became a family. Mira traced the letters with her finger, smiling. "Best day of my life." "Mine too," William said, his voice full of love. They watched the sunset together, their daughters playing around them, and felt something precious and rare. They'd found what the world said was impossible. A family born not from blood or obligation, but from the simple, stubborn choice to love when everyone said they shouldn't. She knocked on his door begging for shelter. He'd opened it seeking redemption. Together, they built something that would last forever. And it did.